Waverly Knobs Entertainment presents the Branch Out Podcast with your hosts Evan Charles Anderson and Tatiana Ivan. We discuss all the exciting facets of digital media and marketing for businesses and professionals. Our goal is to empower you so you can increase your knowledge, engagement, and brand identity. Let's get ready to branch out. Thank you for listening to episode 23 of Branch Out, the digital media and marketing podcast with Evin Charles Anderson
and Tatiana Ivan.
And today we have a very special guest in the studio. We have Kaite Rosa, who is the Director of Marketing and Content at VentureFizz. And if you haven't heard of VentureFizz, we'll definitely dive more into that. But let me tell you, they have some fantastic material if you are a startup tech company in Boston, especially with their Talent on the Move series as well as their Driven Profile series. So, Kaite, thank you for coming in, and how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing fantastic. Thank you. No, glad you can make it in and talk with us today. And for people that, again, aren't familiar with VentureFizz, could you kind of introduce the company as well as how you got involved?
VentureFizz is an online platform covering tech entrepreneurship and career inspiration, focused entirely on companies here in Boston. We have one of the hottest job boards here in Boston with over 1,500 jobs for tech and startup companies. And over 200 companies have a biz page with us, which is a place for them to not only feature their new roles, but also highlight their company culture.
It's such a great way of connecting people with these startups. Now, do you know where the original kind of concept first formulated from?
Sure. So our founder, Keith Klein, he started VentureFizz back in 2009. He, in his previous life, if you will, was a recruiter for over, I think, nearly 20 years. And he was working with all these really great, interesting companies and finding out all these unique stories and meeting really innovative people, and wanted a place to, like you said, create that community, highlight the interesting things that people are doing and that their companies are doing. So he started VentureFizz. It was a little bit of a side project for a couple of years for him, and then in about 2012, 2013, he really started to ramp up his efforts with it.
So before you were at VentureFizz, you worked for a lot of different companies such as Virgin Pulse, Lionbridge, Brafton. What made you decide to join VentureFizz?
I came to VentureFizz by way of Virgin Pulse, which is a health tech company out in Framingham, and I was there for about 2.5 years as Senior Marketing Communications Manager. I got to work on some really exciting projects there. I helped see the company through a rebrand. They were growing very rapidly, and last May they secured $93 million in funding.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was really great. There were a lot of really exciting projects to work on, and I learned a ton in a relatively short amount of time. And I stayed on with the company for about 6 months thereafter, but I really missed that early stage growth opportunity aspect of working at a startup. So I connected with our founder, Keith Klein, and the role that I'm in now is really just like the perfect next step for me. And it was really interesting to me to go back to more of my journalism roots, which is what I initially did professionally, and here we are.
What were some of the concepts or skills that you took away from that past experience that you've brought over to VentureFizz now?
Sure. So the kind of marketing that I was doing on previous teams was, we were edgy, I guess, and that part of that came with the Virgin brand. We kind of had the ability to do that. But one thing that kind of rang true across everything that we did was don't let fear of failure stop you from trying. So when that came to marketing strategies, it was, if you have a good idea, we're going to vet it as a team and make sure, it has some legs that it can stand on, but just go out and do it. Give it a try. And if it fails along the way, then, you either evolve it or you learn from it and kind of move on. And if it's really successful, then how do we build on that and how do we make that scalable and grow it? So that was one of the big takeaways from previous roles that I'm aiming to apply to VentureFizz. Another one, and this is a little bit more personally, but I like to I at least work by, it's actually a Facebook mantra, which is done is better than perfect. Sheryl Sandberg writes about it in Lean In, and when I read that, it really resonated with me. I think I'm a little bit of a type A, maybe more than a little bit of a type A, so the wanting to feel like everything needs to be perfect all the time can hold me back. I certainly worked with people who it's held everything back from, so I try to keep that in mind. Don't let the quest for perfection hold you back from actually getting out there.
I think those are two great tips just for entrepreneurs in general. Don't let the quest for perfection just like stop you from getting out there. Yeah. And also don't let the fear of failure stop you. If you have an idea, try it out. I mean, we certainly in our company have had both of those things all the time too, where it's like, will this work? I don't know. Let's try it. Let's see what happens. And okay, it's not 100% perfect. Well, let's just get it out there and we can fix as we go or course correct along the way.
Well, and I know too that when we talked to Dave Gerhardt from Tech in Boston, he had mentioned too that there is no perfect recipe. And, what he does for success or anyone else does for success doesn't mean will work for you as well. And so the best thing to do is, as you mentioned, just go out there and see what works and see what fails and learn from that experience and try to take away all the strong points and continue on through it. And that's all you really can do. It's like a marathon. It's not a quick sprint by any means.
That's so true. It's so true. I think we've been, like, as marketers, conditioned to look for all of these best practices, and they might apply in a couple of cases, but what works for you, may not work at this company. So it's always about just getting out there and trying and seeing what sticks and what doesn't.
Now, with your past experiences, expertise, what do you think are common situations or frequent issues that companies within the Boston tech community tend to face?
What we were actually just talking about, I think, really ties into this. I think that everybody's looking for these quick hit solutions to their problems, whether it's marketing, whether it's employee engagement, whether it's, customer success. We've been conditioned, like I said, to narrow in on what these best practices or hacks or whatever you want to call it are. And not everything works for everyone else, and that's just kind of the fact of the matter. And you've got to be willing to test and to fail and to glean those results and those learnings from your failures. Another thing that I see a lot is, as companies are scaling, they're having issues scaling their culture, and that's definitely top of mind. It's something that we have people contributing about on VentureFizz pretty frequently. It's something that at my previous role that we heard from our clients there all the time about scaling culture. I think the problem comes from the fact that when you're scaling your startup, when you're growing your startup, you're putting all of this energy into finding the right resources and the solutions and really working with your customers that often you may not necessarily be focusing on scaling your culture and growing your culture until it's too late and people start leaving your company and your culture. So I think it's really important for companies to keep their people top of mind and create people-focused cultures and strategies. You see a lot of companies doing this by, we have a ping pong table in the break room. Like, well, ping pong tables are cool, that's great, and perks like that are really fun, but you can't just do that and call it a day. It's not really going to solve the actual problem. So I think that this actually goes back to testing and seeing what sticks. Take that approach with your people and with the culture that you want to create in your company and keep evolving that, because while a ping pong table may be great at some of the larger companies or the company down the street, it may not be what your employees may care less about it.
So it sounds like it's really important to kind of do your own internal marketing research with your employees and so forth, and just see, okay, what is the situation like for you? What do you enjoy? What do you dislike? And how can we improve as a culture in order to have you be in the best environment possible?
Absolutely. And I think
so considering that VentureFizz focuses a lot on an industry that is constantly changing and evolving, do you have any theories or thoughts as to where you see marketing going that could assist with some of the situations and the issues that you just touched on?
I think that we're going to see more companies investing in a HR marketing hybrid, because companies are always marketing to their customers, they're marketing to their candidates, but that experience isn't always the same, and the messaging isn't always the same. And it's really important for those to be unified across the board. And likewise, I think we see a lot of companies where they might have a great candidate marketing experience, right? Their recruitment marketing might be fantastic, but then that doesn't extend into the employees. So that goes back to the cultural problem. I think it's really cyclical, and I think we're going to see more companies investing in their internal marketing efforts.
The opportunity to broaden their horizons and strengthen their knowledge base, that can get people to want to stay and want to be with your company because they appreciate it, because they're being given different opportunities that they might not otherwise experience in any other kind of culture or company.
No, that's so true.
It's good to be well-rounded too, just so you know how to communicate with somebody in a different area or in a different department. You kind of understand where they're coming from, what they need from you, and so on and so forth too. It's definitely very useful. I actually saw, I think it was Richard Branson, but that might be wrong, said that there's not just entrepreneurs, but there's also intrapreneurs, and it's those types of employees, in the company that have that entrepreneurial mindset where they're doing a little bit of everything, or they want to learn and they want to help the company and they want to help the team and they want to all grow together. So on VentureFizz, there's a very active job board for the Boston tech scene. And with that, you said there was about 1,500 new jobs there. What are some of the new companies that you're really excited about working with on that?
Sure. So one of them, and this kind of ties in my interests that had led me to Virgin Pulse, which I'm personally interested in health and well-being. So one company, Wellist, they're located in downtown Boston, and they are helping. It's an app, and it will help cancer patients or anyone with an illness, kind of on that spectrum, find various resources to support their day-to-day lives. So one of the biggest challenges if you have one of these illnesses is just getting to your doctor's appointments, and you have to rely on so many other people. And if you don't have, say, a ride or someone to kind of be your caregiver or maybe pick you up after an appointment, oftentimes patients are non-compliant, and what they're doing is helping provide these resources really easily through this app. And I just think that that's super interesting, and I always enjoy a mission-driven companies or support mission-driven companies. Another one, which you may have heard of, they received a good amount of press last year when they received funding, is Drafted. It's an employee referral app. So if you are at a corporation and internally you refer someone to HR for a role, eventually you get a bonus, right? But oftentimes the whole process is very it goes into a big black box. You don't really know what's going on. Is your friend, are they going to get the role? All of these different questions. So it just makes the process a lot easier for the employee to manage and for HR. And it also taps the external community. So you may know about my company because we're sitting here having this conversation, and maybe you know someone who would be great on my team, but maybe you wouldn't typically refer them because you're not an internal employee or whatever, and this kind of just helps facilitate these different conversations and lets companies broaden their reach, basically.
It's very nice. It sounds like both of those companies are all about connecting people with the resources that they need, which is
hadn't even made that
nice.
connection, but you're right. They are. At the end of the day, that is exactly what they do.
It's kind of ironic, as that's what you're doing for them as well with this job board too. You're connecting them with resources, and
It's all very meta.
It's like the light bulb just went off. You're right. Yeah, all about connecting people and helping build communities.
And I think that's where I've been seeing a lot of different companies go to is how can we offer you a service, or how can we get you the resources that you need and easier? I can't remember the actual trend that they call it now, but companies like Drizzly and a few other ones where, you could order, let's say, alcohol and they'll deliver it to you. But it's all like the service industry type of stuff where it's like, okay, well, we can connect you with the right resources within the perfect amount of time, with the least amount of inconvenience. And people are loving those now, whether they're applications like you had mentioned or websites or what have you. And it seems to be huge, especially talking about the tech community, because a lot of it is purely tech-based, all through applications. I mean, at first, I think really kicked off with things like Uber, for instance, and how much that picked up, and everyone else has kind of jumped on and went, we can really do a lot with this.
It's interesting that you bring that up. I have written a lot since I've been with VentureFizz about these, for lack of a better term, on-demand service applications and companies. I think it's definitely a growing trend, and I personally think that a lot of the problem goes back to, it's a behavioral economics theory, the paradox of choice, just that we have all these choices thanks to the internet, right? And that sounds great, but at the end of the day, if you have to comb through 25 million results to find the best place to go to lunch, you're not going to. And I personally, at least, would much rather have 3 choices, and I think that it's just helping, a lot of these services are helping either eliminate choice or narrow down choices to make things easier for people.
And I think that right there is just a perfect, I would say, bit of wisdom for people to think on, especially as they're starting up a company, is what can they offer and how can they make it as easy as possible to utilize? And I think that, yeah, if you don't make it easy, people are going to tune it out and they're going to ignore you. You could be the best application ever, the best company or best service, but if you don't make it simple for people to understand and to interact with, you're going to lose people instantly.
So true. So true. I say that a lot when people ask me about advice for writing, especially, from non-writers. I think a lot of people are almost stuck in that 10th grade mentality of writing a 5-paragraph essay and it, so often I'll be reading something and it's like, what are you actually trying to say? You are making it, by the style and tone that you're using is making it more difficult to understand. I think that you see that a lot in, take a look at the marketing emails that you get. I'm sure you guys, you get a million of them. And so often it's like, wait, so what are you actually trying to tell me? And I think especially as marketers, we need to really focus more on getting our message out there.
Well, and I think this is a great segue into as what I'm deeming today as our WOW segment, or our Words of Wisdom segment. So now we know you do mentoring for the youth through the John Andrew Mazey mentoring program, and it's to assist students against adversity on their path to success. So with this, we thought this would be a perfect segment for you. Now, if you were speaking to someone trying to break out into their respective industry, but they just didn't know where to start, what would be your marketing words of wisdom for them?
So through the Mazey Foundation, the Mazey mentoring program, I'm partnered with a high school student, and we have been for the past couple of years. So when she was starting to enter, must have been her junior year, and thinking about colleges and a possible career path, she thought she knew where she wanted to go, but she wasn't entirely sure. So I really encouraged her to sit down and have real meaningful conversations with people doing what she wanted to do. With the example of my mentee, she wanted to go into health and well-being. She really thought she wanted to go into personal training at the time. We sat down and talked to someone who was a personal trainer and did an informational interview. And then we also sat down and talked with someone who was a nutrition professor. Her perception was completely flipped, and she realized that she did want to go into nutrition. So I think it's really important to sit down and have conversations with a broad scope of people within the industry you think you want to be in. And then I think it's also important to take, I don't want to say as many opportunities as you can, but a variety of opportunities to help expose you to the different areas that you could go in.
And there seems to be a common thread in our conversations too, going back to kind of experiencing the broad, having a broad perspective and just trying to take in as much information as you can, whether it's understanding the industry from a broad perspective so you know how to communicate with one another and just understand where the industry is going, to also taking in that broad perspective to see, is this the right fit for me? Or are we doing things the way we as an industry or as a company want to go? Or do we need to change it up? And I think having that broad view at first will really help you then narrow it down. But until you know all the options out there, it's very hard to narrow something down.
Very true. I think a good way to look at it, especially if someone's early on in their career or early on in industry. So I think it's important to kind of initially drink from the fire hose, if you will, and then, like you said, really narrow your and refine your approach.
Before we close out episode 23 of Branch Out, are there any other announcements or news that you want to share about VentureFizz or anything that we haven't touched on?
Sure. So one of the areas that I've been growing since I've been on with VentureFizz is our profile series. So we have a profile series called Driven, and it focuses on the people that you may not necessarily hear about all the time. And we're really trying to get at their unique individual stories. We've profiled a number of different people as part of this series, and I'm looking to do more. And I can certainly source my own individuals, but it's great to open up the door to a broader audience. So if anyone is listening and knows someone who should be included in that, who is in the Boston tech scene, I would encourage them to reach out to me.
As creators of stories ourselves, we can definitely appreciate a great story, especially an untold story that you may not otherwise have the opportunity to really understand and hear about. So I think that's a fantastic opportunity for any entrepreneurs out there, any people who are really diving into the Boston tech scene and want to share their story of where they got to and how they got there. I think that's a fantastic opportunity. And that's called the Driven Profile series that you're doing right now in VentureFizz. Excellent. Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Katie, for coming on to Branch Out today. We really appreciate your time, and hopefully our audience is just as excited as we are to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me. It was great.
Well, once again, this has been episode 23 of Branch Out, the digital media and marketing podcast. Make sure that if you love this episode today, we have a whole 22 other episodes to check out, as well as hit that subscribe button and tell us what you love about our podcast. But until then, I'm Evan Charles Anderson.
And Tatiana Ivan.
We will see you next Sunday.